and coming back from the pandemic and jumping into my school board term, my first term, we definitely saw coming back to school after having been gone for so long that there were some real needs in terms of mental health and social time and well-being for students. And we heard a lot from our staff, particularly our school psychologists and our counselors, that there was just a real kind of outcry at some of our schools for students raising their hand for help. And our challenge in 2021 and 2022 was that we simply didn't have enough people in our schools to address the needs that students were coming to us with. And we have since that time added a lot of staff in our schools. We've added additional counselors, additional psychologists. We have been working more closely with Department of Human Services, and we've been really happy to have some of their clinical specialists in our schools. We have set up a telehealth service so that our young people, if they can't get to a person in person in our community, that there is somebody that they can connect with online, a human, not AI. And so we put a lot of things in place in the schools to try to support and augment what we already had. And I guess I'm curious from your perspective as folks who have been students in our schools, if you feel like that's made a difference or what's been particularly helpful?
Well, about the pandemic, I can say I had my freshman year of high school online, and then that transition into sophomore year, I can definitely feel like, the difference. Some people found it more hard to socialize or to, make friends after the pandemic. And, it did take like a few years to get back into the rhythm of things, but I do feel like there was an improvement in the resources that schools had and what we were learning from. If Nadia can add to that.
Yeah, I'd say right now I go to Washington Liberty, but there's definitely a big disconnect with peers and psychologists, counselors, teachers. So one of the problems that we're facing in high school as students especially is not just reaching out for help, but once we go and we kind of get the courage and the confidence to go and confide in someone that we find will help us, like a teacher, a trusted counselor, a lot of the times there is barrier. The student is scared to open up fully. The student is also scared to talk to their friends about it because they risk being judged. Especially right now with social media and everything, it gets shared very quickly. News and information about a student's life quickly becomes not as personal as they want it to be. So the fear of that, their personal mental health struggles being broadcasted is definitely now higher than it ever was. I'm interested in what you guys have to say about that from a different perspective.
I don't know, do you want to go first? Was your question?
I was curious to pick up on what you talked about with social media, if it's okay if we go there. Because the point I wanted to make too was that although we saw in schools, we saw an increase or a rise in needs of our students coming back from the pandemic, what we know locally and nationally is that actually there were some trends in youth mental health that predate the pandemic in terms of rising rates of depression and anxiety among young people, feelings of isolation. And there's been a lot written and talked about social media and the timing of that. When we saw that trend increase, sort of dovetails with the rise of different social media platforms. One of the things that we've tried to do in schools about that, of course we're teaching about digital citizenship and we're trying to educate folks about safety and well-being online. But the other thing has been our cell phone policy. And this is a big deal in the past year where as a school division we've made a decision that phones are going to be away for the whole day for all of our students. And anecdotally, what I've heard on the school board from some of our staff, anecdotally they have said that they feel like there has been an increase in well-being and socialization in schools, of folks talking to each other. They feel like on the balance this is positive. But I also know that some folks use social media to connect with people who have similar identities, right? So we know that marginalized communities, members of marginalized communities, sometimes find safety in that online space. And so I guess I'm curious on the social media aspect, how you feel about that both inside and outside of school.
Yeah, I'd say I think there's a time and place for having your phone out. In class wouldn't be one of them, but for example, right now in high school, especially with students who are taking rigorous classes, we need time to decompress. And a lot of that also factors into the reason why mental health problems have been rising for high schoolers and students, teachers in general. It's just because of the workload that we're being faced with. It's just not something that we can handle. Already going to school from 8 to 3, transporting, sometimes you have to take your siblings to school, family responsibilities. There's not much time to have for yourself. So what a lot of students complain about is lunch or generals period or free periods used to be times where students can do that. They can talk with their friends if they want to in person, but they can also go on their phone and maybe doom scroll for 20 minutes, but it's not the worst thing that's happened. Do their homework, catch up. A lot of the times our laptops ban a lot of the websites that we use to do just basic research. So I know I use my phone even sometimes just to assist with any tasks that I have, and not having that is a problem, but it is also, again, improving student connection. So I definitely think there's a balance to having your phone in school and not, for example, like in class, again, I wouldn't recommend it, but periods such as free periods or lunches, I think that it could be beneficial to at least allow students to be on their phone and maybe not encourage it as much as it was before.
I think that there's an interesting notion around level setting, what mental health really means, right? And so when we're thinking about mental health, it doesn't mean that we're happy all the time, right? Mental health is really this recognition that we have a number of feelings that we can experience at a given time, and that they're reality-based feelings, right? Like right now, I feel content. I'm not sure how everybody else feels right now, but we can identify it and probably reality set it to where we are right now. And if we were feeling something other than contentment, happiness, or some kind of emotion that's maybe affixed to, stasis or joy, there is also the concurrent appropriate response to it as well, right? And so when we think about mental health, it's those two things: reality-based emotion, reality-based kind of coping, right? Appropriate coping. And when we get outside of that, that's when we really are starting to have the conversation around where is that crisis developing for when we are not able to do one or the other. And I think that there's so much research out there, and we often have a lot of this fanfare when we start talking about we scapegoat social media or we scapegoat cell phones, and we don't often pick up on some of the things that are very basic and very easy as well, right? Which are our basic habits. And what we, I think, learned through the pandemic, because young people have struggled for a very long time, right? Pandemic being this hopefully once in a lifetime thing that happens. But one thing that we understand from cell phones during the pandemic is that it did allow you guys to stay connected to your peers, right? But the cell phones and social media didn't allow you to stay connected to your broader village. And so if you can think right now, you might know 2, 3, 4, 5 caring adults in your life that you became disconnected from, who were outside of your family, who were part of that tribe that you needed to be able to say, wow, you know what, Devanshi, my day was hard today. Let me just tell you, girl, this is what happened today, right? And so those parts of it started increasing, exacerbating the teen mental health crisis, because that entire village no longer became available. And then to your point around teen anxiety, teen stress, we live in a community where we have such high expectations for our youth. with regard to their workload, right? And perhaps our kids are over-prepared for college. Perhaps they are doing more than what's necessary, and we're pushing them to do more than what's necessary to be successful in college, in technical school, in the workforce, wherever it is that they're going. And that's contributing, again, to this underlying stress and not being able to have a place to appropriately, that second part, right? React upon it. And then the third thing I will say is, when we take away our cell phones, without putting any judgment on whether that's a correct policy or not a correct policy, but kids are going to need to use that as a method to be able to connect, right? But what we don't talk about are those things like sleep, right? And this is a place where maybe, it's this, right? We don't give our kids enough sleep, right? And even changing the start time for middle schools, high schools a little bit to allow young people to get the sleep they need, which is 9 hours, right? They need to have a minimum of 9 hours of sleep. But if you're catching up on your social media, catching up on all your schoolwork, catching up on your relationships beyond your peers in a very short window of time, that's moving into your sleep cycle, and then you're not functioning as well, on the mental health or emotional side, that social emotional side, in a way that is disconnected from, like, if you get 7 hours of sleep, you're still going to be successful academically, right? And so when we think about kids and we say, oh, Sonia's doing great, she's a straight A student at Washington Liberty, that's not telling the picture where she may be struggling on the mental health side. I'm not saying you are, but just kind of giving an example where she may be, because there may be some other things that you're not able to get, sleep being one of them, connection being another, right? Because you're managing so much that perhaps you may not be required or need to manage at this time. What do you guys think about that?
I think the sleep, I don't want to call it a crisis, but it's definitely a crisis. It has so many factors that contribute to it. It's not only social media, but it's also schoolwork sometimes. It can, like you mentioned, there's so much talent in Arlington, especially when it comes to students, and it's such a proud thing to say, but it's also, it can feel overwhelming, especially in the college application process, when you're being compared to students in your school when it comes to getting accepted to other schools. So I think, academic pressure is definitely also a factor influencing lack of sleep. Sometimes it can even be stress, not even homework, it's just stress that keeps you up at night. That's definitely something I struggled in when I was in high school, especially during my senior year. And yeah, I think just even making the start time for school a little bit later would definitely help with that. So I support that.
When you felt stressed out, what were the ways that you were able to effectively kind of manage that stress? Because I think it's interesting, and I'm now raising a very young child, not a teenager, he's 6 years old. And we live in this world where we are doing a lot of well, talk to me about it, express it to me, and trying to work through the feelings through a lot of talk. And sometimes talk isn't the answer, right? Sometimes suppression is the answer because talking may be too hard, right? And then you're able to find another outlet, like potentially music or art or exercise or, and then you're able to kind of come back to it and process it. Do you think that we in this community are kind of, or even at this time, are helping kids understand that there's a lot of different ways for you to be able to manage stress, anxiety, all the different emotions that you can feel in a given day, and recognizing that these are all healthy emotions, but part of our response needs to be healthy as well.
I would say I was very lucky to have mentor figures who really encouraged me to, explore other ways to release that stress, whether it be through hobbies or, just going out with friends to the fair. I'm not sure if that is something that we're really emphasizing in the school setting. One thing I think we should encourage is maybe having, I know we have like social emotional learning parts. I'm not sure specifically how long, like, I know it's different for like middle school and high school, but I think something that would really help us is there's this thing called mental health first aid. I'm not sure if you guys, oh, you have heard of it. It's something I was able to take my first year in college, and it's definitely helped me. You know, it's not only just to like learn how to support myself in an emotional crisis, but also learn to support my peers, which for teenagers, that's really important. Sometimes we don't trust our adult figures as much as we trust our friends. So being able to take that course for me was so important to, like, you know, learn how to dismantle some biases I may have had, but also, like, you know, gain strategies to help, you know, relax myself, but also be able to support my friends.
I wanted to ask a slightly different question. I'm curious, one of the things in schools that we know affects mental health and well-being is school culture. And we can, for individual students, right, we can do, as you mentioned, we can do a really beautiful job with social emotional learning and teaching people how to identify their feelings and all the different ways you can work through them. And on an individual level, we can support students like that. But I worry as a mom and as a school board member that in a collective sense, that it's really the school culture that for some of our students can, you know, boost their well-being. School can be a place where you feel like you belong and you feel safe, or school can be a place where you feel targeted and where you feel like you're not welcome because of your identity, you're bullied. And we are, we in Arlington, and I think, you know, beyond Arlington, are just really wrestling with this question about how do we improve school culture so that our students are treating each other with respect and with kindness, and the adults in the building are doing the same thing with each other and with the young people. And I guess if you have seen things in your school experiences that you feel like have really fueled positive school culture, I'd be curious to know what kinds of things those are, or what ideas you have if you didn't see it.
Yeah, I definitely say in Arlington, in Wakefield, Washington, Liberty, and Yorktown, it's so normalized for students to be top of their class, 3 varsity sports, all APs, helping around in the family, and also having time for themselves. And this really isn't the normal, and the average student doesn't take 12 AP classes in high school and isn't on 8 varsity sports. And a lot of the things that we do in Arlington, and it's great that we push these things, because at the end of the day we're preparing students to go to college and later find a great job and come back to Arlington, which is an amazing city, and everyone feels lucky to be a part of this community, but sometimes it feels overbearing. So when students or counselors, teachers are pushing children to do the max and push themselves to be the best versions of themselves, the best version of yourself isn't being top of your class. It isn't being so overwhelmed with school and sports and all these extracurriculars that you don't have time to go and spend 20 minutes at the park and walk around. I'd say something that we've stopped doing, and you were asking what is kind of a beneficial thing, something that you can use to cope. Sometimes, honestly, it's doing nothing. It's just going around on a walk and being bored and feeling that you're here and you're present and you're in the moment, and you don't feel like you have 12 things to do after school, and then tomorrow you wake up and you have a full schedule again and again, and it's kind of this endless cycle of never being fulfilled with yourself. So I think that fulfillment, it comes from within, and a lot of the times what we don't get from school is just a safety net and acknowledging that it's going to be okay, that you don't need to do all of this that's so normalized now.
Well, you guys are impressive, absolutely impressive. I'm thankful to be able to share space with you guys and hear from you. I will tell you, you know, a lot of times we as a community, as adults, try to think that we maybe have some answers that we certainly do not, and have to have more open opportunities for young people to be able to express what it is that they are experiencing in life. So congratulations to the both of you. I look forward to how you guys change the world and change the way that we are addressing youth mental health. So thank you very much.
Thanks for being here.